The neon sign of Molly's Diner flickered weakly against the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the wet pavement. Amber haze pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the cold October night. At 19, Amber had learned that life rarely offered surprises, at least not the good kind. Her world was measured in dollar tips, overdue rent notices, and the endless cycle of sleep, work, repeat. The diner paid just enough to keep her afloat in her studio apartment, where the radiator coughed more than it heated. She fumbled for her phone to check the time, 2:17 a.m. The last bus had already left, which meant another 40-minute walk home through streets that grew more dangerous with each passing block. Amber sighed, watching her breath form small clouds in the frigid air. As she turned into the narrow alley beside the diner, a shortcut she'd taken countless times, the sound stopped her cold. A child's voice, terrified and desperate, coming from somewhere deep in the shadows. "Help! Please, someone help me!" Amber froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard stories about traps set for naive young women, but this voice belonged to a little boy, and the terror in it sounded all too real. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely audible even to herself. The crying stopped immediately, replaced by a hushed whimper. "Please," came the small voice. "I want my daddy. The bad men said they'd hurt me if he doesn't pay." Amber pulled out her phone, its screen casting a weak blue glow into the darkness. She should call 911. That would be the smart thing to do. But as she moved closer, her light fell upon something lying on the ground, a child's backpack, torn and muddied, with a business card half buried in the dirt beside it. Amber knelt down, her fingers trembling as she picked up the heavy cardstock. No business name, just a phone number embossed in gold and a name, Franklin Blackwood. As she flipped it over, her blood turned to ice. Written in elegant script were the words, "In case of emergency involving my son, Leo." "Is your name Leo?" she called out softly. The sobbing halted instantly. Yes, came the reply, stronger now. "My name is Leo Blackwood. I'm 7. The men said they were taking me to Daddy, but they lied and locked me up instead." Amber's hands shook as she dialed the number, her instincts screaming at her to run. But the terror in that little boy's voice, she couldn't just walk away. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered that sent shivers down her spine. "Who is this?" The 3 words weren't a question, but a demand. Amber swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how small her voice sounded. "I found something. Someone. Your son, Leo. He's locked somewhere near Molly's Diner on West River Street. I can hear him crying for help." The silence that followed stretched so long she wondered if the call had dropped. When the voice returned, it had changed. Colder, harder, dangerous. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not call anyone else. Do not move. I'm coming." The line went dead. "Leo?" Amber called out, moving deeper into the alley despite the warning to stay put. "Where exactly are you? Can you see anything that might help me find you?" Her voice echoed against the brick walls as she strained to hear the boy's response. "I'm in a warehouse," the small voice replied, stronger now with hope. "There's a blue door with numbers on it. I can see it through a crack in the wall." Amber's eyes scanned the row of buildings behind the diner, most abandoned, but at the far end stood a squat building with faded blue paint. The minutes crawled by like hours. Amber found herself checking her phone obsessively. 2:31, 2:32, 2:33. Each second felt like an eternity, as she spoke soft reassurances to the terrified child. "Your dad is coming, Leo. Just stay quiet now, okay?" At exactly 2:37 a.m., the sound of engines shattered the night silence. Amber's head snapped up as headlights flooded the mouth of the alley. Not one car, but several, moving fast through the empty streets. The sound grew louder, echoing off the buildings until bright lights blinded her. Car doors slammed in rapid succession. 1, 2, 3, 4. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, and Amber realized with growing terror that she'd stepped into something far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The silhouettes of men appeared at the edge of the light, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of training and purpose. At their center, a figure that seemed to command the very air around him stepped forward into the alley. Franklin Blackwood was nothing like Amber had pictured from his voice. She'd imagined someone older, harder, a stereotype from crime movies. Instead, the man who approached was in his early 30s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit despite the hour. His dark hair was swept back from sharp features, and his eyes, cold, calculating eyes, scanned her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the bricks behind her. "You called about my son," he stated, his voice the same commanding tone from the phone, but in person, it carried even more weight. She nodded, words failing her as she pointed toward the warehouse with the blue door. "He says he's in there. I can hear him through the walls." Blackwood turned to his men, issuing silent commands with subtle hand gestures. As they moved toward the warehouse, weapons appearing from beneath expensive jackets. "Stay here," Blackwood ordered her, but something in his tone had changed. There was an edge of desperation only a father could feel. The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The men surrounded the warehouse, communicating through earpieces with military precision. Blackwood stood beside Amber, his entire body coiled like a spring. "Why did you call me?" he asked suddenly, his eyes never leaving the warehouse. Most people in this neighborhood mind their business, especially at this hour. The question caught her off guard. "I heard a child crying for help," she replied simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or disbelief. Before he could respond, a series of sharp sounds echoed from the warehouse. Not gunshots, but the metallic crack of locks being broken. Moments later, a man emerged from the warehouse with a small figure clutched in his arms. "Leo!" Blackwood's voice broke as he rushed forward, taking his son into his arms. The boy was pale and frightened but appeared unharmed, clinging to his father with desperate strength. Amber watched the reunion, a strange tightness in her chest. The powerful man she'd just witnessed commanding an armed team had transformed completely as he held his son, whispering reassurances and checking him for injuries with gentle hands. "The place is empty," reported one of the men, his accent thick with Eastern European roots. "They left in a hurry. Must have had a tip-off." Blackwood nodded, his attention still focused on his son. "Who took you, Leo? Did you see their faces?" The boy shook his head, burying his face in his father's shoulder. "They wore masks, Daddy. But one had a star tattoo on his hand, like Uncle Julian's, but bigger." At this revelation, something dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes, a cold fury that made Amber instinctively step back. He turned to her, studying her with renewed intensity. "You've done something tonight that I won't forget, Miss Hayes." "Amber Hayes," she supplied, suddenly aware of how out of place she was. "I'm just a waitress at Molly's. I was heading home when I heard Leo." Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. Just a waitress who risked herself for a stranger's child. That's rare in this city. His gaze swept over her worn uniform, the patched jacket, the exhaustion written in the dark circles beneath her eyes. Rarer still in this neighborhood. Before Amber could respond, one of Blackwood's men approached, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Sir, we found this." He held out a small device, blinking with a red light. "It's still transmitting." Blackwood's expression darkened as he handed Leo to another man, instructing him to take the boy to the car. "Miss Hayes, it appears you've stumbled into something dangerous," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. "This wasn't a random kidnapping. It was a message, for me, and now you're a witness." Amber felt the blood drain from her face. "I won't tell anyone," she promised quickly. "I didn't see anything important." Blackwood's smile held no warmth. "That's not how this works. The people who took my son don't leave loose ends." "I'm nobody," Amber insisted, panic rising in her throat. "A waitress living paycheck to paycheck. Who would even listen to me?" Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. "You're coming with us. Now." The finality in his tone brooked no argument. As one of his men gently but firmly guided her toward the waiting cars, Amber realized her simple life had just been irrevocably altered. The night that had started with a routine walk home had thrust her into a world she'd only seen in movies. The Blackwood estate loomed like something from another century, a massive stone mansion set back from the road, protected by high walls and an ornate iron gate that swung open as their convoy approached. Amber stared through the tinted windows, wondering how such opulence could exist just 30 minutes from her cramped apartment. Inside, the wealth was even more apparent. Marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, artwork that belonged in museums, and rooms larger than her entire apartment. A housekeeper appeared, elderly but sharp-eyed, who whisked Leo away for a hot bath and clean clothes after a tearful goodbye to his father. "This way," Blackwood directed Amber, leading her to a study lined with leather-bound books. He gestured to a chair across from a massive desk, then poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "You look like you could use this." Amber accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Why am I here, Mr. Blackwood?" The question hung between them as he settled into his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Because you saved my son's life, and because that act put your own at risk." He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "The men who took Leo work for someone who wants to hurt me. Not through violence. That would be too direct. They want to break me by taking what I love most." His eyes flickered to a photograph on his desk. Leo smiling widely, missing his front teeth. "I don't understand what any of this has to do with me," Amber said, finally taking a small sip of what turned out to be exceptionally smooth whiskey. The warmth spread through her chest, steadying her nerves slightly. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Blackwood's smile was genuine this time, transforming his severe features. "Or the right place at the right time, from my perspective. The question is, what happens now?" He tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the polished wood. "You saw my men, my operation. You know my name. I told you I won't say anything." Amber set the glass down, meeting his gaze directly. "I can't afford to get involved in whatever this is. I have rent due next week and a double shift tomorrow afternoon. I just want to go home and forget this happened." Something that might have been respect flickered in Blackwood's eyes. "That won't be possible, Miss Hayes. The tracking device we found was sophisticated, military grade. They know Leo was rescued, and they'll be looking for witnesses." The implications hit Amber like a physical blow. "You think they'll come after me? I'm nobody important." Blackwood shook his head slowly. "In my world, there are no innocent bystanders, just liabilities and assets. Right now, you're both. What does that mean for me?" Amber asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blackwood stood, moving to the window to look out at the manicured grounds now bathed in pre-dawn light. "It means you can't go back to your apartment. Not yet. Not until I've dealt with this threat." The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. "But my job, I'll be fired if I don't show up tomorrow. And my things, my clothes." Amber's voice trailed off as she realized how trivial these concerns must seem to a man like Blackwood. "I don't have anyone who can help me." Something in her words seemed to resonate with him. He turned, his expression softer than before. "No family? Friends?" When she shook her head, he nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Then we'll provide what you need. Clothes, compensation for missed work." Before Amber could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. It opened to reveal Leo, freshly bathed and dressed in pajamas, his small face still pale but composed. "Daddy, I can't sleep." His eyes widened when he noticed Amber. "You're the lady who found me. You called my dad." Leo broke away from the housekeeper and ran to Amber, throwing his arms around her in an impulsive hug that caught her completely off guard. "Thank you for saving me," he mumbled against her shoulder. Over the boy's head, she met Blackwood's gaze, surprised by the emotion she saw there. "Leo, Miss Hayes is tired. She needs rest too," Blackwood said gently, moving to place a hand on his son's shoulder. "Mrs. Collins will show her to the guest room. You can thank her properly in the morning." The boy nodded reluctantly, stepping back, but keeping his eyes on Amber. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. The question caught Amber off guard. This child who had just experienced such trauma was worried about her leaving. Yes, I'll be here," she found herself promising, though she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, led Amber through the labyrinthine corridors to a guest room larger than her entire apartment. The four-poster bed, silk sheets, and adjoining marble bathroom spoke of a luxury she'd only seen in magazines. "There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit," the older woman explained, her tone brisk but not unkind. After the housekeeper left, Amber sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the night. She'd gone from struggling waitress to rescuing a kidnapped child to being sequestered in a mansion, all in the span of hours. Nothing about her life would ever be the same again. A soft knock drew her attention to the door. Blackwood stood there, his tie loosened, and a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to check that you have everything you need," he said, remaining in the doorway. "And to thank you again. Few would have done what you did tonight." "I just did what anyone would do," Amber replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. The silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken understanding. "You should know," he finally said, "that I don't take debts lightly. You saved what matters most to me. I won't forget that." Dawn broke over the Blackwood estate, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Amber stood at the window of her guest room, watching gardeners tend to immaculate flower beds. The peaceful scene seemed worlds away from the danger and chaos of the previous night. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Collins bearing a tray with freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to bring you breakfast," the housekeeper explained. "He's meeting with his security team, but would like you to join him in his study at 10. Amber thanked her and sipped the rich coffee, wondering what new complications this day would bring. The wardrobe yielded clothes that fit perfectly. Designer jeans, soft cashmere sweaters, even shoes in her size. Someone had done their homework while she slept. At precisely 10 o'clock, she found her way back to Blackwood's study. He wasn't alone. A man with sharp features and calculating eyes sat across from him, their conversation stopping abruptly when she entered. "Miss Hayes, this is Harrison Reed, my head of security." Reed assessed her with cool professionalism, then turned back to Blackwood. "The surveillance photos confirm it. The Petrov organization is behind this. They've been watching your movements for weeks." He slid several photographs across the desk. "And they know about her now." Blackwood's jaw tightened as he examined the images. To Amber's horror, they showed her leaving Molly's diner the previous night, followed by shots of her talking on the phone in the alley. "They had someone watching the whole time," she whispered. "They saw me call you, which means they now see you as a liability," Reed stated bluntly. "Standard protocol would be to eliminate all witnesses." His clinical tone made the words even more chilling. "She can't return to her apartment or the diner. They'll be watching both." Blackwood nodded, his expression grim. "Arrange for her belongings to be collected and her rent to be covered indefinitely. Contact the diner and inform them Miss Hayes has taken a position elsewhere." The casual way he rearranged her life left Amber speechless. "And what about me?" she finally managed. "Am I supposed to just disappear? For how long?" The reality of her situation was sinking in. Everything she knew, her entire life, had vanished overnight. "Until I can guarantee your safety," Blackwood replied, meeting her gaze directly. Before she could respond, Leo burst into the room, his face bright with excitement. "Daddy, can Miss Amber come see my train set? Please?" The boy's innocent enthusiasm cut through the tension like a knife. Behind him, his tutor apologized for the interruption. Blackwood's expression softened instantly at the sight of his son. "That's up to Miss Amber, Leo. She might be busy right now." The hope in the child's eyes was impossible to resist. "I'd love to see your trains," Amber found herself saying, grateful for any excuse to escape the grim conversation. As she followed Leo from the study, she caught Blackwood watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. Whatever happened next, she realized, her fate was now irrevocably tied to this dangerous man and his world of shadows and threats that had claimed her against her will. The days at the Blackwood estate blended together in a strange rhythm. Amber found herself drawn into Leo's routine, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, becoming a fixture in the boy's life. The trauma of his kidnapping had left him with nightmares that only seemed to ease when she was nearby. Blackwood watched this growing bond with careful attention. "He trusts you," he observed one evening as they sat in the garden, watching Leo chase fireflies across the lawn. "That's rare. Since his mother died 3 years ago, he's kept most people at a distance." The revelation of Leo's motherless state added another layer to Amber's understanding of both father and son. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It must be difficult, raising him alone in this world." She gestured vaguely at the estate, the security, the ever-present threat lurking beyond the walls. That night, a thunderstorm swept over the estate, rain lashing against windows like tiny bullets. Leo appeared at Amber's door, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down his face. The weather had triggered memories of the warehouse, the cold concrete floor, the voices of his captors. As she calmed him with gentle words and a mug of warm milk, Amber realized the full extent of Leo's trauma. Beyond the kidnapping itself, he carried the weight of his unusual life: armored cars to school, bodyguards at birthday parties, the constant awareness that he was both precious legacy and potential target. "This world," Blackwood repeated with a hint of amusement. "You mean my business?" He studied her face in the fading light. "You haven't asked what exactly it is that I do, Miss Hayes." Most people would be curious about the man holding them captive. Amber met his gaze steadily. "You're not holding me captive. You're protecting me. At least that's what you say." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "As for your business, the armed men, the enemies willing to kidnap children, I can make an educated guess." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "And yet you stay. You read stories to my son and eat dinner at my table." His voice dropped lower. Aren't you afraid of being tainted by association? A good person like you, involved with someone like me?" Before she could answer, Reed appeared, his expression tense. "Sir, we have a situation. There's been a breach at the west perimeter." Blackwood was on his feet instantly, signaling to the security team positioned discreetly around the garden. "Get Leo inside, now." Everything happened with practiced efficiency. Guards escorted Leo and Amber into the house while others moved to secure the grounds. Through the windows, Amber could see men with tactical gear and weapons deploying across the property. This wasn't the first time such a breach had occurred. Inside, Mrs. Collins ushered them to the panic room, a fortified chamber hidden behind the library shelves. "Stay with Leo," the housekeeper instructed firmly. "Mr. Blackwood will come when it's safe." The heavy door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, leaving them in a room with monitors showing feeds from security cameras around the estate. Leo's small hand slipped into Amber's, his grip tight, but his expression surprisingly calm. "It's okay," he told her. "Daddy always handles the bad men. He's the strongest person in the whole world." The absolute faith in his voice revealed a child who, despite everything, felt secure in his father's protection. Hours passed before the door finally opened to reveal Blackwood. His suit was immaculate, but a darkening bruise on his jaw and the intensity in his eyes told a different story. "It's clear," he announced, extending a hand to help Amber to her feet, "but we have a problem." In his study, with Leo safely asleep upstairs, Blackwood revealed the truth. It wasn't a random attack. They had inside knowledge of our security protocols, codes, blind spots, shift changes. His voice was cold with controlled fury. "Someone in my organization is feeding information to the Petrovs." The implications chilled Amber to the bone. "You have a traitor," she whispered. Blackwood nodded grimly. "And until I find them, no one is safe. Not me. Not Leo." He paused, his eyes finding hers. "And not you, Miss Hayes. Especially not you." "Why especially me?" Amber asked, the weight of her new reality pressing down like a physical force. Blackwood's expression darkened. "Because you're the wild card, the unexpected variable. The Petrovs want to know why I've brought a waitress into my inner circle. They'll assume you have value to me." The implication hung in the air between them. "Do I?" she asked quietly. "Have value to you?" Blackwood moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the night sky. "You saved my son when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That alone earns my protection and my gratitude." But there was more, unspoken truths that neither of them acknowledged. Over the past weeks, their interactions had evolved from cautious politeness to something deeper. Shared meals, late-night conversations, mutual concern for Leo, connections forming despite the circumstances that had thrown them together. "I need to ask something of you," Blackwood said finally, turning to face her. "Something I have no right to ask." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I need you to stay, not as my guest, but as part of this household, as Leo's tutor, officially. It gives you a reason to be here that my enemies might believe." The request stunned her. "I'm not qualified to be anyone's tutor. I barely finished high school." But even as she protested, part of her recognized that this wasn't about qualifications. It was about the bond that had already formed between her and Leo, and perhaps between her and his father. "Leo trusts you. He needs that stability right now." Blackwood stepped closer. "And I've come to rely on your perspective. You see things differently than the people in my world. You remind me there's more to life than power and control." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building for weeks, acknowledged at last. "If I stay," Amber said carefully, "I need to know the truth, all of it, what you're involved in, who's after you, what happened to Leo's mother. No more half-truths and vague explanations." Blackwood studied her face, weighing his response. Then, with a decisive nod, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and began to speak. He told her of his family's empire, built over generations, legitimate businesses interwoven with darker enterprises. He spoke of the power struggle with the Petrov organization, of betrayals and alliances shifting like sand. And he told her of his wife, Anna, who had loved him, despite knowing exactly who he was, who had given him Leo, and dreamed of a different future for their son, who had been killed not by enemies, but by a drunk driver on a rainy night, a random tragedy that all his power and connections couldn't prevent or avenge. Outside, a security patrol passed by the window, their shadows stretching across the manicured lawn. Amber watched their methodical movements, struck by how quickly she'd adapted to this militarized existence, Just weeks ago, such protection would have terrified her. Now it represented safety in a world where danger lurked behind every misplaced trust. "Your enemies know I'm here now," she stated, not as a question but as acknowledgement of an uncomfortable truth. "They'll assume I'm important to you, which makes me both a liability and potential leverage." The words hung in the air, unvarnished and stark in their implication. By staying, she wasn't just accepting his protection, but potentially becoming another vulnerability in his carefully fortified life. "I want something different for Leo," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion rarely displayed. "I've been trying to legitimize the business, move away from the old ways. That's why the Petrovs are making their move now. They see it as weakness." Amber sat in silence, absorbing everything. The man before her was both more and less than she had imagined, capable of violence and deception, yet driven by love for his son and a desire for redemption that he scarcely acknowledged even to himself. "I can't offer you a normal life," Blackwood said finally, "but I can promise you'll be safe, that Leo will have someone who cares for him, and that you'll never want for anything material again." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "The choice is yours, Amber. You can leave. I'll set you up somewhere new, with a fresh start, or you can stay, with all the complications that entails." In that moment, Amber Hayes thought of her old life, the endless shifts, the struggle to make rent, the loneliness of her empty apartment. Then she thought of Leo's smile, of the purpose she'd found here, and of the man watching her now with rare vulnerability in his eyes. "I'll stay," she said simply, "not for the security or comfort, but because for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As dawn broke over the Blackwood estate, illuminating the garden where a young boy would soon be playing, Amber made her choice, stepping willingly into a dangerous world that, against all odds, had begun to feel like home. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Your support means everything and helps me continue creating these stories for you.